In this video, I'll show you how to use the marker sketch photo effect for Photoshop. So this Photoshop action will automatically transform your images into a marker effect. I'll leave a link to this Photoshop action down in the description if you want to download it and try it out, as well as time codes if you want to jump to a particular section in this tutorial. Alright, let's get started. So after you've opened your image in Photoshop, the first thing we need to do is load the Photoshop action that was included in the download. So if you go to the window menu and select actions, the actions panel will pop up. You can also click on just this play icon here, click on that and that'll open the actions panel. Next you want to click on this drop down menu and select load actions. Then just navigate to where you downloaded the action, and there will be a .atn file here, marker sketch photo effect by Sevenstyles.atn. Click on that and the action will appear in here. So next we need to load the brushes that were included in the download. So if you just hit B, or you can just select the brush tool over here, then right click anywhere over your image to bring up the brush panel. Next click on this icon and go to import brushes. Next navigate to the brushes folder, so it's called brushes, must be loaded into Photoshop. Go in there and select the .abr file, double click on that, and then the brushes will appear here in the brushes panel. Next what you want to do is go back into the actions panel here and twirl open the actions folder. And this is the action that we want to play, this one called play here. All these actions below here, you don't need to touch any of these. Make sure you don't rename any. You also cannot rename this action here, otherwise the action will break, it won't work at all. So just select a play one and click the play icon here, click that, and there'll be two pop-ups at the start of this action. The first pop-up here is just reminding you to check the size of your image. So you just want to click continue here, and you'll get the image size window pop up. And I recommend running this action on images that are at least 3500 pixels at the long dimension to around 4500 is a good range. So you can see the long dimension here on my photo is 4000. So if you open up your photo and let's say it's only 2000, so you take the long dimension, which is width, and just increase it to anything over 3500. 3500 to 4500 is a good range, so I'll just keep this at 4000, and then you want to click OK, and in a moment you get the second message, and this one here is asking you to brush on the effect area. So what you want to do here is click stop, and there is a brush that's already selected for you to do this, and so what you want to do is just brush over your image where you want to apply the effect. Okay, so if you want to apply the effect to your entire photo, you could do it two ways. You could just brush over the entire image like this, or you can use the shortcuts Control Backspace or Command Backspace, and that will fill that layer with a color. So that is then telling the action to apply the effect to your entire photo. Okay, so I'll go over that again. So you can either brush over an area like this, okay, then that will be the effect will be applied just that area in red, or you can fill the entire image with a color by holding Control Backspace or Command Backspace, and that will then create the effect of your entire image. So when you have done that, what you need to do is simply click the play icon here in the actions panel again, and that's it. So from there, the action will take, depending on how much detail there is in your image, anywhere from around 3 to 6 minutes. If there is a lot of edge detail in your photo, it could take 5-6 minutes. It's a very simple image, maybe 3 or so minutes. So I'll just fast forward this video and get to the result, and then we'll go through all the layers and folders and talk about what they're doing. So when the action's finished, I just like to collapse the play action here and just hide the actions panel for the moment. And let's look into the layer panel now, and just remind that I'll leave time codes down in the description if you want to jump to a particular topic in this tutorial. So what I always like to do at the start or after an action is finished is quickly collapse all these folders that are open here, just to neaten everything up. And to do that, you hold down Control Alt or Command Option and click on any one of these folder arrows here. So overall adjustments will be selected for you. So hold down Control Alt or Command Option, click on that arrow, and that will collapse all the folders. So let's firstly take a look at the marker strokes folder here. So if I turn this one on and off, you can see that is where most of the effect is being applied. So let's go inside here and take a look what these layers are doing. So the way I've set this up is that down the bottom here in yellow, we have 11 stroke layers. So you can see stroke 1, definition, I've got in brackets here opacity, down to stroke 11. So strokes 1 definition is where sort of the smaller strokes have been applied. So if I turn that one on and off, and I'll turn the second one on and off, you can see that they are quite small strokes, and that does a lot of the work in applying the definition throughout your image. So as you go down here, the strokes actually get bigger. And if you want to view the strokes, you can hold down Alt or Option and click on this layer mask here. So you can see the area in white, that is where the strokes are. So if I go down the layer order here and hold down Alt while clicking on the mask, you can see that the strokes get bigger. Okay, and I've got in brackets here opacity, so just to remind you that you don't need to use this layer at 100% opacity. And I think from a few of them I've actually set their default. So this one here, stroke 6, I've set this one's opacity to 50%. So I'll just turn it to 100%, then back to 0. You can see that there. And you also don't need to apply all these strokes if you don't want to. So part of the fun part about experimenting with this effect is that you can turn some of these off, and it will sort of punch holes throughout your image and create a different look. So definitely experiment with that. And this one here, you can see this one's standing out a bit. I've got this one marked in purple. This one's called Strokes 3 Brightness White Edge Highlight. So if I turn this on and off, okay, you can see that is applying some of these thin white edge highlights, and this levels adjustment layer here is clipped to this layer below, and so this is brightening up this layer below, strokes 3. And this layer is helpful if you want to just add a bit more definition throughout your photo. So you can see if I turn that on and off, it just helps the details pop a little bit more. So if you just double click on this layer, you can see by default I've actually increased this brightness here. So if I drag this all the way up, all the way to the left, and then back to the right, you can see what that is doing. Okay, so definitely experiment with that one. Quickly turn it on and off to see if you prefer it with it off. You can also use the mask here to erase any areas you don't like. So if you just hit B to access the brush, and then right click anywhere over your image. So if we go back inside the marker sketch brushes here, these brushes, all these ones here, you can use if you want for brushing onto the layer mask. But this first one here, I've just called marker sketch mask brush. So you can use this one to brush onto masks. So you can just select that. Now, if you hit D on the keyboard, that will reset the swatches here, then X to flip black to the foreground color. So if you brush black onto this mask here, we're going to be hiding this adjustment layer. So select the mask, and let's say I don't want these lines perhaps here. So I can just brush that away. I can brush that away there. Okay. Now if I hold down Alt or Option and click on that mask, you can see that's the area that I brushed. So, and the same applies to all these other layers here. If there is an area that you don't want, say if you turn this one on and off, and I'm looking at the bath here, which one was it? This one. Let's just say that I wanted to mask out a bit of this area from that layer. I can just select the mask, hit B, I can grab this first brush here and reset the swatches, make sure black is active because I want to hide it. I can just brush away there if I wanted to do that. So let's now move up to these gray layers here. And what these layers do is that you just double click on them, and if you grab this middle handle here and wiggle it around, you can see that will brighten or darken specific areas throughout your marker sketch. And so these levels adjustment layers will brighten these yellow layers down here. So for example, I have strokes 4 brightness here selected. So this specific levels adjustment layer will brighten the pixels of this layer down here, the strokes 4 definition. Strokes 5 brightness will target strokes 5, this one here. So what I like to do is usually just start at the top here, and I just grab this middle handle, wiggle it around to see if I prefer it darker or lighter. Okay, just go down the order here and do that pretty much until I get down to the bottom, because I've tried to set defaults that look good, but you can definitely alter the look of the outcome just by adjusting these levels here. So let's close the marker strokes folder now, and let's take a look at these two layers here in blue. So they are original shadow fill layers. So if I turn these off, you can see that what these do, these fill in the darker areas of your image. And what I suggest you do with these is just experiment with adjusting the opacity. So if I turn this bottom one off for the moment, and I'll turn this top one's opacity to 100%. So this one, if you turn this to 100%, this uses more of the original shadow details of your image. So what I might do to show you this, I'm just going to duplicate this layer, bring it to the top, and I'm going to right click and clear the layer style. So this is the image here. So you can see it closely resembles the original photo, but what I've done, I've just eliminated a lot of the noise and a lot of the finer details. So you're left with basically just the most prominent details throughout the image. And from there, I've restricted this layer to only appear in the shadows. So if I double click on this layer, okay, I've adjusted the blend if section here. So under this slider here, called this layer, I've restricted this layer, its tonal range to only appear within this region. So basically I'm removing anything from the midtones to the highlights and only keeping the shadow detail of this layer, okay? So by default, this was set at 60%. Okay, so you can see as I lower the opacity, you get some of these these marker strokes coming through in the shadows. But if you don't want that look, you want to increase the opacity of this layer. This one below is similar. Okay, if I increase this to 100%, except this one has a bit more of a artistic look to it. So if I drag this one to the top, increase the opacity to 100%, and I'll clear the layer style. So that is this one here versus this top one. If I clear this layer style, turn on. So there's the difference between the two. So if you want to target more of the original details, shadow definition in your image, adjust the opacity of this top one. But by default, I have them both on, and I think from memory, they're both at around 50%. So definitely play around with those two. Let's now take a look at the random direction strokes folder here. So if I turn that one on and off. So what these, if you go inside this folder here, there are 3 layers. Okay, so I'll just turn this off for the moment. So you can see if I now turn off the marker strokes folder, pretty much all that we're left with are the shadow fill layers here. Okay, now, so here is the marker strokes, but you'll notice that if you have the random direction strokes folder turned off, there are a lot more gaps. And the way I've built this effect is that the marker strokes will tend to be focused around where there is definition in your photo or your image, and where there is really not much definition, the random direction strokes will aim to fill in that area with just some random strokes. So by default, random strokes number 3 was off, but you can see if I turn them off one by one, let's just isolate. So you can see here are the layers here. Okay, so if you are wondering where the random direction strokes are coming from, it is this folder here. And there isn't really too much to talk about here, apart from their opacity is at 50%. You can increase that to 100 if you want them to be a bit more prominent. Okay, or you can lower them down, but definitely experiment with turning them off quickly to see if you prefer that look. You can also, again, just select the mask here and brush onto that mask if you want to hide a particular area. Okay, let's just lower the opacity down of this one just a bit. All right. Next, let's take a look at the purple folder here called Free Brush, and I've got in brackets here, brush onto the layer mask. So let's go inside this folder. So you'll definitely want to spend some time in here because these layer masks here allow you to basically just brush on your own marker strokes. So to demonstrate this, I might just turn off the random direction strokes folder here so we've got more gaps. And there are a bunch of different layers here. So these top 3 I've just called Free Brush. The next 3 here are Free Brush, and I've got in brackets here full image. Now I'll open up another example in a second here to demonstrate the difference between these. Basically, all you need to do here is select any one of these masks, and if I hit B, right click to get the brush panel out, and I'll select our mask brush here. If I select this mask here and brush white because I want to reveal this layer, if I just brush here, I can start brushing on my own marker strokes. So you're not restricted. You don't have to use these random direction strokes here if you don't want. They are just there to just quickly fill in empty areas with strokes if you want that look. But if you don't want them, you can select these and just brush away. Okay. And a few things you might want to experiment with here with the brushing is you might want to adjust the flow here. So if I decrease the flow here and start brushing, you can see that it is much more transparent. Now, if I hold down Alt and click on this mask, you can see there's the brush there. If I increase the flow to 100%, start brushing, it's much brighter. Okay, so you can do that. And what you might also want to experiment with is the size of the brush. So if you just hit the left or right square brackets, that will adjust the size of the brush. So I've got a very small brush here, and I can just sort of make sure white is active. So I'll hit X. What I've also done here, I've got the layer selected. I'm going to select the layer mask. So make sure the layer mask is selected when you're brushing, and I can just brush away. So I can brush sort of random shaped strokes here, and I can make it much larger using the right square brackets, and I can just fill in this area. I could just go over here, fill in that. And one thing you'll also notice with these layers, if I've set their opacity to 70%. This is so that it creates a nice layering effect. So if I select this second one now and start brushing over the same area, those two layers sort of overlap quite nicely and create a nice blended effect. Okay, whereas if I set this to 100%, it's much more solid and sort of blocks out that top layer here. But if I lower the opacity, you get them both coming through. So just keep that in mind that I have set the opacity to 70%. And of course you can lower it even more if you just want to be much more subtle. So I could go ahead and fill in this bath here if I wanted to. So I'll select the layer mask, hit B, make sure white is active because I want to reveal the layer. And I'll just start brushing away. And I might select the top one now and brush over it again. Get a nice layering effect. Might go to this third one. Okay, just sort of draw some squiggles around here. All right, so I'll just open up another example now to explain the difference between these. So in this example, when I ran the action, I brushed over just a portion of the photo to apply the effect to, so you can see that there. But this is a good example to show you the difference between these top three layers here to these three layers here below. So if you look at the thumbnail there, you can see that this layer is restricted to the area that I only applied the effect to, whereas the thumbnail in these three below, you can see the entire image. So where this is handy is that if you want to brush more marker strokes around the edges, you want to select the masks of any one of these three layers below, the full image ones. So if I select the mask, hit B, right click, grab the mask brush, and to reveal that layer, you want to make sure white is the active color. So just hit X a few times to reset it, make sure white is active. But now when I start sort of brushing out here, you can see that we are moving beyond the limits of the area that we define the effect to. So you can get creative, sort of extending some of these lines out further. Something else you might want to do with this brush, if you wanted to, is increase the smoothing. If you're using a mouse, this just enables you to create schmutz. So if you're a bit shaky with your mouse, this will just smooth out the lines a bit. So I might just draw it back down a bit. So yeah, experiment with this. But the top three layers here, you'll notice that you cannot, if I select the mask and start brushing outside here, it's not doing anything. It will only be restricted to the area that we refined the effect to at the beginning of the action, where if you remember when the action stops and asks you to brush on an area, if I start brushing, it won't move beyond there, but you can freely brush inside the area. But yeah, use one of these three layers below, or all three, select the mask and start brushing to create your own strokes here. Okay, and these three down the bottom here, if you want to brush with a solid color, what I like to do is just double click here on this colored box, and I might just sample a color here from the image, select that. Now when I select the mask here, hit B, oops, and start brushing, I can now brush with a solid color, and I might want to grab this one below, sample another color, select the mask, start brushing. Okay, so yeah, definitely experiment with these layer masks. And let's now move down to explain these three, because these three have relevance to if you are only brushing over a portion of your image as well. This layer here, background texture fill, by default the opacity of this layer is set to 0, so if you turn it on off it does nothing. But if you want to fill in your background with a lot more of the original detail from your image, just increase the opacity. So you can see as I do that, it starts to fill in a lot of these white gaps here between the brush stroke textures. So if I just jump back to the first example here, let's increase the opacity of this one to take another look. So you can see as I increase it, what that's doing. So if you just want a quick method to quickly fill in a lot of these gaps, jump down to this bottom layer, background texture fill, increase the opacity, to a level that you like. But just keep in mind that the default opacity of that is set to 0. So let's jump back here. Now, if you want to export your artwork on a transparent background, you need to hide the background layer here and also your original image layer down the bottom here. So when you do that, you have the transparency. So this layer here, back in color, if I turn this one off, you'll see a lot of transparency then appears throughout your artwork here. Okay, so if you want to export with a solid white background here, just make sure that remains on. You can also change this color if you want to experiment with a different backing color there. You can also adjust the background color here if you want to make changes to that. Let's now take a look at the original image details layer here. Now this layer is handy if you want to increase the level of definition in a specific area. So for example, this guy here, maybe I want to make him a bit more detailed, a bit closer to the original details of our photo. What you can do is select the mask here and get the brush tool out. So hit B, right click over your image, select the mask brush here. Okay, so we want to reveal this layer. But before I do that, if you hold down Shift and then click on the layer mask, that temporarily disables it. So you can see by the before and after. So when I disable the mask, you can see it's really just the original image with a few effects applied to it. The opacity of the layer is set to 50%. So 0, there's 100. So as I decrease that, we get a bit of a blend between the original and the textures coming through. But what you can do with this is select the layer mask, get the brush tool out, and if you brush right onto the layer mask here, we can target specific areas where we might want to add a bit more detail to our artwork. So if I turn this on and off now, so this is handy if you are running this action on, say, a portrait, or there is someone a bit off in the distance where the textures have distorted their face a bit. You might want to use this layer to brush onto that area to clean it up and to bring back that detail. And once you have brushed, experiment with adjusting the opacity. Okay, so you probably don't want to use 100%. There's too much of a contrast between it being too detailed versus that rough sort of texture look of the marker strokes. So you want to, it might be an idea to set it to 100% while you're brushing, so you can clearly see the area that they're brushing. Okay, so maybe I want to remove a little bit around here. Okay, and once you've done that, then lower the opacity of that layer to get a nice blend between that and the textures. So let's jump back to the original example here, and maybe on this one we want to increase the level of detail around the bath here, and maybe the plants by the window. So I'll select the layer mask here, hit B, right click, grab the mask brush here, make sure white is my active color because I want to reveal the layer, and then I would start brushing throughout this area here to increase the detail. And then I might want to just lower the opacity down a bit here. And there we go. So that's without the layer and that is with it. So just increase the definition a little bit. Let's now take a look at the edge lines folder here. So if you go inside this folder, there are 6 different layers. And if you turn them on, they just create outlines around the edge definition throughout your image. And each one has a slight variation on the look. So you can see that one there. versus that one there. And as you go down, there are different looks. These bottom two are a bit scratchier and a bit more subtle. So you can combine multiple, of course, and you can also adjust their opacity if it's too strong. So this first one here, if that's too strong, just lower the opacity right down. And you can also use the mask to control where you want those sketch lines to appear. So if you don't want it to appear evenly throughout your image, what I like to sometimes do is select the layer mask here, hit Control or Command I to invert the mask, grab the brush tool, hit B, and now when I brush white, I can reveal the sketch lines in areas that I want them to appear rather than the entire image. And what I also like to do is to get a preview of how this layer looked without the mask, I hold down Shift, so that way I can take a look around to see where some of the other lines were. Maybe I like these lines here over the light in the mirror, so I'll click on the mask to release it. Now I can start brushing onto this area, just like that. Hold down Shift again, take a look around. Maybe this photo, this portrait over here, I will start brushing over there to add some more lines. And if you hit X to flip it to black, you can quickly erase from the mask. Adjust the brush size, left and right square brackets. Okay. Now, if I just disable this mask for a second and turn the opacity at 100%. So this top one here, lines 1 in white, if I turn this one on, okay, you can see what that's doing. But if I turn this one off and then turn this top one on again, you can see that's not as prominent the change. But when I turn this one on, then apply it again, it is much more obvious. So sometimes when you turn these lines on, they create lines in areas where your image is already dark. So adding these edge details actually makes that area darker and potentially lose more definition. So what this top layer aims to do is add definition back into areas where it might be lost. So you can see through the table here, if I turn this one off, you can see that there are edge details there being applied from this layer, but it's already quite dark there. So it's kind of, you lose a bit of definition. But if you turn this one on, you start to get edge details come back in. So this top layer here will only appear in the darkest areas of these layers below, specifically this one. Okay, so I like to turn this one on when I'm using some of these others, but it also depends on if you like that look. So you might turn that on and not like it, but it might work in specific areas. So again, just use the layer mask to control where you want it to appear if you only like a certain region. So the last folder here to talk about is the overall adjustments up the top here. So if you just turn this folder on and off, you can see what that's doing. It is adding a bit of overall contrast and brightness. So let's take a look. So this top one here is adding a bit of contrast. So if you double click on the layer, you can see that this slider here, the contrast layer, I've just increased that a little bit. So just be aware that that is applied. Next one below, the exposure, that is being applied as well. So if you double click on that one, you can see at the top here, I've increased this just a fraction. Okay. And the bottom one here, color vibrance, I've also boosted the colors a little bit. So as I turn that on and off, you can see the difference there. So if you're wondering why the colors are looking a bit more saturated, it is because I've increased the vibrance up to around here. You can increase that more if you want. You also got the saturation slider there that you can play around with as well. Let's now take a look how we can apply some overall adjustments to make our artwork pop some more. So when I've finished adjusting all the layers, what I like to do is select the top visible layer. So the top visible folder here is overall adjustments. Then I like to merge everything that I see onto one layer. So to do that, you hold down Control Shift Alt E or Command Shift Option E, and that will put everything that we see here on the canvas onto one layer. So if I move this layer around now, everything is on one layer. And then I like to right click and go to Convert to a Smart Object. This is just going to enable us to re-edit these settings that we apply in a moment if we feel we need to change them. So next, what I like to do, I like to go Image Adjustments, then down to Shadows and Highlights, this one here. And what I like to do here is I usually like to check out boosting the shadows a bit to see if I prefer that look. Okay, and I think these can come up just a bit. Next, what I like to do, I experiment with boosting the color here to 100. You can see not much has changed, but when you decrease the midtone, you start to get a bit of a different look. So you see contrast starts to get removed from the artwork, but while the contrast gets removed, the colors boost. So I'll bring this back to 0. So let's watch this again. So as I decrease this, contrast is being removed and colors are becoming more saturated. So definitely try this one out because there's been a few examples where I've done this and it's definitely made it look, definitely given it a different look. Okay, so let's click OK there. Next, what I like to do is go to the filter menu and go to the camera raw filter and just reposition this. And there's a couple of things I like to experiment with here. Firstly is the texture slider. So if I just drag this to 100 and to 0, you can see the difference there. So what you could do is just increase the texture a little bit. That will make all the details just pop a little bit more. You've also got the clarity, which you can experiment with. So there's 100, there's minus 100. So I usually just like to increase this a fraction. Under the detail tab here, I'll click on that and I'll usually just boost the sharpening just a little bit. And then I jump into the profiles here. So this icon, click on that. And then you've got a bunch of different color presets. So under modern, I usually like to jump to this one and apply this first one. So when you click on it, you've got this amount slider here. So I usually drag it to 0 and then just increase it a little bit to see if I prefer it. And then you've got these other ones and you can combine them. So I can click on this one now. I'll bring this to 0, then I'll increase it a bit. So now I've combined Modern 4 with Modern 1 to build a bit of a different look there. You've also got other presets here you can play around with. Then I will click OK. And then what I like to do is just turn the layer on and off to see the before and after. And you have these filters as smart filters. So if I want to jump back into the shadow and highlights and maybe decrease the color slider here, I can do that. Maybe if the shadows are too bright, I can just jump back in here and just adjust that a little bit. And so there's the before and after. So you can see how everything just kind of pops a little bit more with these few little adjustments. So let's now take a look at the before and after. So I'll select the original image here, Control or Command J to duplicate it, then Control Shift right square bracket or Command Shift right square bracket to send it to the top. So here is the original image and here is the marker sketch effect. So just a reminder that a link to this Photoshop action is down in the description along with time codes. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoy using the effect.